being here today for the Tuesday, August 16, 2022 meeting of the Equity Advisory Committee of the Met Council. And I just called this meeting to order. Before starting with any business, just a couple of housekeeping issues. Please help yourselves to the food back there, it's pretty good. The jollof rice is excellent, my recommendation. And we have a rather light agenda today, so that's good because on one aspect of it, because then we'll have more time for discussions on some of the issues that we'll be dealing with today. So the first order of business today is approval of the agenda. I have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
There's a second? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, excellent. I think that, can we approve the minutes with a quorum? Point of order, no? Do we have a quorum?
No. You don't.
We don't? Okay. So let's hopefully some folks might be trickling in, and then we can go back to the businesses that require a quorum. So just moving on with the agenda for today, we always have this public invitation for folks from the community to address the EAC at this point. If there's anybody from the community here? Don't think so? Okay. And next item on the agenda for today is the reports of the subcommittees. And we have our transportation, operations, and affordable housing subcommittees. I think we have folks from at least two of those subcommittees present. Don't know if we have any updates that folks would like to share.
I'd like to remind our members that we have been told that subcommittees must meet in person, and so we've discussed that as a committee and have decided that we have task forces. While we were in that process of understanding what our work was and what our purpose was, the former subcommittees have not met, but I believe the task forces are in the process of reforming and getting ready to meet again.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. All right, we're moving along. So the next item on the agenda, we have the Metro Transit Service Equity Evaluation, and we have Selena, Martina, and Cindy. Okay, Cindy Harper and Rachel Duncan with Metro Transit, and you're next.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair Gonzalez and Co-Chair Leah, council members and committee members. My name is Selena Martina. I'm the Senior Manager for Equity and Inclusion at Metro Transit or Transit Equity. I'm working to change my title to say Transit Equity, but Equity and Inclusion is what I came before you a couple times to present some work around equity and Metro Transit. Today we have a presentation for the service equity evaluation, and I will let Rachel and Cindy to introduce themselves in a little bit. This evaluation work was shared with you actually in April in the form of a memo. And I'm not going to quiz you or ask you to tell me what it said, so this is not really the presentation or the time to do that. But this evaluation was already conducted and presented to the Transportation Committee. You received it as a memo item, but we wanted to take an opportunity to go over that evaluation with you all and engage in conversation about the work of the evaluation that takes so many resources and so many collaborations between various departments within Metro Transit, and also what is next. So today you're gonna hear from service development, and Cindy will talk to you a little bit about service development and the role within the service equity evaluation. And Rachel is a manager at the in strategic initiatives. and we work really collaboratively to do this service equity evaluation. Another thing I'd like to say before we get started is that this work has been featured in different conferences and other agencies, transit agencies are really looking up to us for this kind of work, looking into how to measure and the impact of our service and transit service, especially with our underserved and underrepresented communities. So we're really, really proud of this work, and we're proud to come in front of you and share a little bit more about how we do it. So without further ado, I'll let Rachel and Cindy introduce themselves. Thank you for having us.
Right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Cindy Harper. I am the manager of route planning in Metro Transit Service Development Division. As Selena mentioned, my area is the one who does a lot of the planning of the bus service primarily. Also, thank you. Also some light rail planning, but primarily bus and then transit way. Everything from the high level planning to the adjusting of service once it's on the street. If you have buses that are running late, or if you have overcrowded buses, how do you go through and fix that? And then also service development does the scheduling. So taking all of those over 8,000 trips a day that Metro Transit operates and putting them into pieces of work for the operators to be able to drive. So certainly quite a important part of the whole process, and then we hand it off, of course, to operations for the day-to-day work on that. So this evening, I wanted to talk a little bit about the service equity evaluation. This is actually our second one. We did our first one. We started looking at fall of 2019, which would be prior to the pandemic. We intentionally selected that time. And then that first one went through fall of 2020, and then this most recent service equity evaluation picked up where the last one left off and went through 2021. Among some of the topics that are reviewed as part of this project included how we changed our service since 2019, and really especially in 2021, because that was the focus of the second report. How have our ridership patterns changed, both due to the pandemic and also the operator shortages that we've seen recently? And did the emergency service changes that we made because of both the pandemic and also the operator shortage meet the Title VI thresholds? How do different racial and ethnic groups experience our service in terms of availability, quality, and experience? And then finally, how have we incorporated some of this work into our daily practices for equitable service planning? I do want to point out a couple of the next slides. Most of the report itself for this project ended at the end of 2021. So if you were to look at the report, you would see graphs that ended also at the end of 2021. We have now got another 8 months under our belt here worth of experience, and so some of these slides here have been updated to reflect going into 2022 to be more current for you here this evening. So the workforce shortage is something that actually emerged prior to the pandemic. Most people kind of forget about this, but before COVID hit, we were already dealing with an operator and workforce shortage, and certainly persists today. The blue line on the table here is the number of operators that we need in order to fill all of the work that we have out there, all of the trips that we have out there. And then the orange is the actual number of operators available. So Metro Transit, as you see, obviously where the severe dip happened, March 2020, that's when COVID hit. So we saw a significant decrease in the amount of service hours on the street because of the stay-at-home order. Metro Transit's actually very proud of the fact that we did not lay off any bus operators due to what was happening with the pandemic and change in workflow. We found other things for folks to do, and we're able to keep that together. So that's the one time where you do see that the orange line was quite a bit higher than the blue line. Also meant that we didn't do a lot of hiring in 2020. We really got back to hiring in early 2021, and so we've kind of been behind the curve ever since in terms of trying to catch up there. You can see that the orange and the blue lines are in alignment to some degree here over on the far right. That's as of early 2022. However, the reason that those are in alignment hasn't really been because we've been hiring more operators. It's been because we've been reducing service in order to try to get those to mate. So, and we are starting to see the blue line outpace the orange line again, and so again, the idea of missing scheduled service and not having enough operators to cover the scheduled work. Bus rapid transit, local and light rail service certainly remains the focus of our system and of our work. So the table that shows bar charts of the number of trips. The gray was service that was operated back in 2019, and the black is service as of this fall. So as of, we have a round of service changes that take effect on Saturday, so as of then, by different types of routes. And so there's a couple of areas where we've actually seen an increase in the number of trips in the BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, and that's because of the opening of the Metro Orange line last December. And then also on suburban local routes, the very first set of bars there, you see just a very slight increase. And that's also really tied to the opening of the Orange line. We restructured a lot of connecting route service to feed into those stations in South Minneapolis and Bloomington, Richfield, Burnsville area. But you'll notice certainly the tallest chart on there, or tallest bar on there, is for core local service. And that really still remains the lion's share of our overall amount of service, and that is also the service that I think quite often a lot of our riders who rely on transit the most tend to be on our local routes. As you can see, though, that has been going from about just under 4,000 trips a day to just over about 3,000 trips in the last 2.5 years. That has certainly, we're at about 80% of the service that we were at 3 years ago. And so it's still still the vast majority of our service, but has been an area that we've had to reduce as you can see with the other areas as well, supporting local. And LRT is another big one where we are at about 70% of the service hours that we were going into the pandemic, and that includes, starting this Saturday, light rail service is dropped every 15 minutes. So it's not something we're excited about, but the alternative is that the bus or the train doesn't show up because we're just missing work. That's not a great option either. Couple of the smallest bars on here are for commuter and express, and then commuter rail or North Star. And those are areas that we have definitely seen the most changes in the travel market as people have continued to work from home, maybe not working in downtown Minneapolis downtown St. Paul jobs 5 days a week in the office. They have the flexibility to be able to telecommute more so than some of our riders on other types of services. And so those are areas that we still have seen quite a decrease in the level of service, and that's partially just that the ridership hasn't rebounded there. So here's a representation of how our ridership is doing, and this is again by type of route or type of service. So overall, the bolder or brighter colored, brighter lines are the actual ridership, and then the lighter colored lines behind them are the trends. And the green line represents core local service, and prior to the pandemic, that was the majority of our rides, over 160,000 a day. Even today, it still is the highest percentage of our rides. The purple represents LRT, the blue and green line. That was our second highest number of rides and still is today. Those numbers have dropped, but the the order has maintained the same. And the other types of service you see on here, so the commuter express, suburban local, supporting local, those are all services that, really have kind of remained flat as we've, as we've come through both the pandemic and the operator shortage. Selena didn't really mention this as much in the introduction, but one of the things that service development that my role is that we work very closely with the OEO staff, Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity staff, in terms of making sure that Metro Transit is in compliance with Title VI rules and regulations that are in place regarding making service changes. And so whenever we have a major service change, we have a process we work very closely with. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to meet Guthrie Baird, the Title VI administrator for Metro Transit. Anyway, one key part of the service equity evaluation is the work that we did in order to make sure that we are in compliance with Title VI, in order to ensure that the changes that we have made in our service were done in a non-discriminatory way. The Federal Transit Administration requires all agencies that get federal funds in order to make them comply with the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, which essentially protects low-income groups and communities of color. And so this formal review is known as a service equity analysis. We review how access to transit, which in our case we measure access as the number of trips that are serving a particular location, how that has changed. We compared service as of December of 2021 to September of 2020, which is when the first service equity evaluation report left off. And then we also did a comparison of service levels in December of 2021 compared to pre-pandemic. And the change in service availability, we studied that in order to see the impact, particularly on the groups that are protected under Title VI as compared to the overall region. I will note before we get into some of the results that one shortfall of this methodology, which is prescribed by the FTA, is that it does not reflect non-home activity. It is based primarily on census data, which is, of course, where people are living. That makes the assumption that the riders on a route represent the demographics of the area through which the route is traveling. We know that's not always the case. This doesn't factor in things like transfers or, if you're going to your destination, whether it's job or education, healthcare, it may be located in an area, it may be located in an area that doesn't have a high percentage of low income or communities of color nearby, but certainly people are going to jobs and classes and such in those areas. So that is certainly one of the things we keep in mind here. The Federal Transit Administration requires that all transit agencies set two different policies that are related to Title VI that impacted the service equity evaluation work. And the council has both major service change policy and the threshold for determining disparate impact, disproportionate burden. These are both council policies that were enacted back in 2012 or 2013, I believe. So a major service change determines when you actually need to do a service equity analysis. You don't have to do a service equity analysis for every single change that you do. If you're tweaking one trip by 5 minutes, that doesn't really rise to that level. So it sets the definition for at what point you do have to do this additional analysis, which in our case, it's been set at a 25% change in hours on a route or in an area. And I will note that that is an increase or a decrease. Of course, we think of it more in terms of decreasing in service, making sure that we aren't having unnecessary impacts. But it's also a case of when we're increasing service, making sure we're sharing those benefits equitably. And then also when we're adding routes or eliminating service, that also triggers a service equity analysis. The disparate impact, disproportionate burden threshold determines when differences are significant enough in order to be a concern. So each region gets to set their own policy. And so the council's adopted what we call the 80% rule. And that means that BIPOC and low-income groups must receive at least 80% of the benefits that white or non-low-income populations are receiving. And on the flip side, white or more affluent residents must bear at least 80% of the adverse effects that BIPOC or low-income groups are experiencing. I will note that this is currently out for public comment. Staff is planning to, or is proposing to raise that bar from 80% to 90%. And so I think this group will be hearing more about that this fall, but it is currently out for public comment to change that. So these two maps show the geographic distribution of residents living near transit that are protected by Title VI. Each of the dots on this map represents 100 people. Map on the left is communities of color, map on the right is low-income communities. You see a dark blue dot that represents BIPOC residents. You see a dark pink dot that represents low-income residents. As you can see, the two maps are fairly similar in terms of where your dark blue dots and your dark pink dots are located, meaning that there certainly is some overlap between where communities of color and low-income groups are living. I don't think that's a surprise to any of us in this region. First, we compared the level of service that was available at the end of 2021 to the level of service we had prior to the pandemic, so fall of 2019. The bar chart on the left shows that all demographics saw a significant decrease in the number of trips that were serving their home area compared to prior to the pandemic. The black line, 18.7%, is the regional average. And so, but you can see that the decrease in service was steeper for the white, non-Hispanic, and non-low income areas. Those areas were seeing about a 21% decrease in service, whereas communities of color and low income areas were seeing closer to a 15% decline. Not great news, but 22% is higher than the 15%. So from a Title VI perspective specifically, there isn't considered disparate impact because the numbers are in the order they are. The map on the right shows change in service availability geographically. The orange or brown dots are areas that saw the biggest losses in service, which are primarily on our express routes and in areas where other alternative service is available. The green dots show areas where service actually increased during that period of time. The little bit of green that you see, South Minneapolis, Bloomington, Richfield area, that's tied to the implementation of the orange line and some connecting route changes we made late last year. There's also a little bit of green in St. Paul, and that's related to restructuring of Route 63. When we look at just the period of time that was covered by the second service equity evaluation report, so September 2020 through the end of 2021, there's much less of a difference when you compare those levels of service. We saw about a 2.5% decline in service overall. And that's really because the majority of the changes that were made at the beginning of the pandemic. So 2021 was a slightly more stable year for us, although we certainly did face and are still facing a severe operator shortage. It's really kind of came to a head again at the end of 2021. That has definitely limited our ability to restore or add service. Again, the bar chart on the left shows the overall decrease in service, 2.4% for the entire region. That's the black line. And so as compared to on the previous slide where that number was nearly 20%. The relative difference when looking at various groups are also much smaller. Although I will note that the decrease in service for low-income residents slightly higher than it is for more affluent areas. 2.2% decrease in non-low-income areas, 2.3% decrease in low-income areas. And so this is where our 80% rule that we talked about a little bit earlier comes into play. The difference between 2.2% and 2.3% is well above 80%, and so therefore it isn't considered to have a disproportionate burden. The map again shows change in service availability geographically. The orange or brown areas are showing biggest losses, mostly on express routes or in areas where we have alternative service. There's a lot fewer brown areas on this map than we did on the previous map because we didn't make nearly the scale of reductions in 2021 that we did when COVID first hit. So if you look at kind of the comparison of the two maps, there's a lot more brown on that first map than there is on the second map. Again, the green shows increases in service, which was related mostly to the opening of the orange line, and that's pretty consistent between the two maps. So now I'm going to hand this over to Rachel. She's going to discuss some of the various service metrics that we have disaggregated by race and ethnicity in this report.
Thank you for having us here today. As Cindy said, my name is Rachel Dunca, and I'm the manager of strategy and performance at Metro Transit, an department called Strategic Initiatives. What that means is our group works a lot with the data of our service and of our systems, and also connects that data to try to make it meaningful as we try to understand how we're meeting or not meeting our goals and vision in the organization. So I just want to back up a couple years prior to any of this analysis. We first started looking at metrics that were looking at our performance disaggregated by race years ago when the community asked us to and demanded more information about how we were investing in bus shelters, light and heat. And that was the first time that we thought, what we have right now with the Title VI is definitely a requirement and necessary, but there's an opportunity here to build more understanding of what is happening at a more finer-grained scale with the data that we have. And so I'll just say that was our first kind of foray into developing a methodology, developing the skills and capacity in our organization to understand our performance disaggregated by race and ethnicity. That is not tied specific to an FDA guideline, but definitely needs to be grounded in a methodology that is repeatable, is defensible, and shareable with other agencies and other institutions that have interest in how we are considering our performance as it relates to disparities across racial and ethnic groups. So that's just a little bit of background. So what I'm going to show you here is we learned a lot about that process with shelters and investments and how we were considering that. And we've kind of applied some of those lessons learned in looking at service. So today I'm going to go through 5, actually a little bit more than 5, maybe 6 metrics that are related to how we think about the available service out on the street, the utility of it, is it useful, is it relevant, and then our reliability, which is number 1, our most important performance metric is reliability. That's tied to our customers' perception of safety, of quality, and of probability that they can rely on us instead of a personal vehicle or other source. So I want to just kind of orient you to these slides and these plots because they're going to start to kind of blend together, but there's some common themes that you can pay attention to. So the vertical axis is always what we're counting. In this case, this is trips, the number of trips. The horizontal, or on the horizontal axis, we're looking at different race and ethnic groups as defined by the American Community Survey, which is done, actually, we're looking at data that is kind of a 5-year rolling average, and we're using those categories. And why we're doing that and using that data source is it is collected every year. It is something that is changes every year, and it is repeatable. And so it allows us to have a common grounding. So as we look over year changes, and I'll show you an example of that, we know we're comparing similar things because we can obviously control our performance data and make sure that our data is consistently measured. So this graph you're looking at is, and always the black line is the regional average. So, and when I say regional average, we're looking at the population that lives within a 10-minute walk or roll of our service. We're not looking at the entire Twin Cities region. We're really looking at the people that are living, the residents that have access to our service and are living near it, and who we are definitely trying to attract transit. So this is the average number of trips or via stop. So this means on average, a resident that is living near a stop will see approximately, you can see they're from 51 to 62 trips within 10-minute walk or roll. And again, this is only for those residents living near where our service is placed. So we disaggregate that by race, and we see differences across these groups. We see that Black and Native American residents live near more service. This isn't a real shock based on the where the segregation of our communities and where people live is we see that where we're running our most frequent service is often where there's people of color living. So that's the first one. The second question I often get is, well, it's great that there's service, but is it frequent? Is it coming up? Is it once every 3 hours? Or is it every 15 minutes? Because if it's every 15 minutes, that makes it actually a competitive alternative relative to other options. So now we're looking at the proportion of the population that has access to routes that are serving their stops at least 4 times an hour, sometimes more. So we see that this is where we start seeing kind of even larger kind of changes or differences across the racial groups. We do see that Native American residents have twice the access, for example, to high frequency service compared to white residents living near our service. This is predominantly because some of our highest frequency routes are serving those people living in those neighborhoods, and some of the express service, for example, which we see higher proportions of white people living nearby, is maybe less frequent than our core local. So back to kind of Cindy's observation about different types of service. There you go. The next question is, that's great, there's service, it's every 15 minutes, but does it go where I want to go? And unfortunately, we don't know where everyone wants to go, and we can't do it at an aggregate level. But we can try to measure the number of jobs, and we've also measured the number of other types of attractive destinations like medical appointments, other types of things. But when jobs is back to this data, wanting to have a consistent data source. Jobs is the only one where we consistently can measure it each year. We have new refreshed data. And it's also, we found there's a high correlation between jobs and other types of desirable destinations. So we're looking at here how many jobs are available on average within 45 minutes in the midday. So we're looking at a time that we know we don't have our best service in the midday. So we see that there are more jobs available to Native American residents, for example. Residents that note that they are Black or African American in the ACS survey, and you can see kind of the different groups. So again, not shocking based on where people live, but something really important for us to build consensus and understanding around and how we understand how we serve people in this region. This is where it gets a little more interesting. So on-time performance, that's an example of a metric that Metro Transit and many other transit agencies measure. We say, if we think of the schedule as a promise, how often are we actually departing those stops at the time we say? And we define that as 5 minutes late is our grace period. So we see before the pandemic, we see, I just want to note, right away you'll see lower performance, not as good in 2019. We're having higher ridership, we have more traffic. This is kind of a typical year. We're seeing around 80-some%. In 2020, it skyrockets. It's the only good thing of 2020. Our on-time performance goes up. Yes, but we have a lot fewer riders.
traffic.
no traffic, no one's really going to, not no one, but many people are staying at home. So we see 2021 come a little bit back to normal. I don't want to say this isn't good, but it's, you can see a little bit closer to 2019 levels. There's a couple, again, we're getting a little bit more back to typical conditions. I'll just say, this is where we're seeing some disparities. So if you look at 2021, we see that white, Hispanic, and Asian populations are seeing on average higher on-time performance, more reliable service. And so we didn't see, we looked at 2019, and this is an example of the importance of measuring and looking at trends over time. We didn't see strong disparities there. We saw some, but particularly in the Native American group. But we see these kind of movement that we need to pay more attention to and try to understand what can we control as it relates to signal priority or speed and reliability improvements, of which there's many different strategies to try to improve reliability of our service. So the next thing that I want to point out that we did is we knew that 2021, we can say we had some concerns about on-time performance, but an even greater failure of reliability is the number of cut trips. This is the number of trips where we said we were going to be there, and not only were we not, we were just late, we never showed up. So this is, I've been working at Metro Transit for 15 years. We never even looked at cut trips for the first probably 5 years I worked here because they never happened, or they so rarely happened we could talk about it in a meeting and talk about a specific incident. That is not the case. That is not the world we're living in right now. We see quite a few trips being cut. And we see, in this graph, you want the bottom, we flipped it because the bigger numbers are obviously a lot worse. So we see some clear disparities where we're seeing Black and Native American residents on average living near stops where there's more cut trips than other racial groups. And so that is something that we are starting to take a look at and trying to learn from. And it also kind of reinforced, not just that we want to, it's hard to, from an operational perspective, say, okay, we're gonna make sure we know the racial makeup of those residents living near our stops, but this also just impressed upon us the importance of really managing these cut trips and having schedules that are aligned, because when they don't align, the impact of that unreliability is not felt equally across the system. And I also just want to point out this example. There are metrics like this one. Last year, if you looked at our report, we looked at crowding in buses because of the pandemic and the distance. And so that was an example of metrics that we sometimes will pull because of known issues. So the ones you saw previously are ones we would do every year. And ones like this, I hope cut trips continues to be this big of a problem, but we kind of respond to areas of poor performance that we know may potentially be an issue. This is just another example of us kind of digging deep. One question was, well, there might be the number of cut trips are disparate, but you know how I was talking about how the flip is true also, that Black and Native American residents have more access to trips. So we're like, well, maybe it's just because they have more access, there's more trips. Well, we looked at actually the percentage of service delivered. So we looked at it from a perspective of all the trips, what is the proportion? So this showed the same kind of patterns and the same kind of disparity. It also helped us contextualize how many trips are we talking about or cut. Are we talking about, in this case, it's the difference between, I'll just point out, Black is 1 in 40 trips that go by near your home are cut versus white, which is closer to 151, it looks like, 1 out of 51. So that feels meaningful, that feels different. And so trying to dig in and understand these things is part of our practice. So this kind of goes into what have we learned. We've learned that when we look at these metrics, when we take our regular performance metrics and we disaggregate it by race, ethnic groups, we can build consensus and understanding. Sometimes we all have our own perspectives of what's happening and why it's happening. We can see the results of our decisions, of many, many, many decisions over time. It's not a single decision. It helps us focus on trends over time. It helps us understand to develop our goals, what are we actually trying to achieve. It's not just one moment in time when someone brings it up. It's part of our annual review, and this is important for our own agency staff. And we also can understand that metrics, the data methodology, although it has been, a lot of thought has been put into it, and I could go into very specific details about them. It's not perfect, but it can help contextualize anecdotal information and bring attention to our concerns, or in some cases, specific, for example, to the investment in Keaton Light, give some reason for a celebration, that we've actually changed our practices and it has an impact at the end of the day on the residents. So the most important thing I think we've learned, it tells us what's happened with results, it doesn't tell us what to do, it doesn't tell us how to fix it. But we have started thinking about that, and that is what Cindy's gonna talk about.
Let me just pause for a second, see if folks have any questions at this point, any of the materials.
Otherwise, this is kind of the last
This is the
slide.
last slide, and then we have some discussion questions.
Okay,
If you have.
go ahead.
I can see the finish line. Okay, so finally, I'd like to highlight some of the ways that we've been integrating what we've learned from both of these service equity evaluations into the service planning work by highlighting some of the work that we've done since that first report. Really kind of falls into two main categories. The first one I'll call Title VI practices. So in 2021, we did a service monitoring study, and that reviews the performance and design standards that are in the transportation policy plan in order to see how well we are meeting these standards in BIPOC and low-income communities. Also, we did service equity analysis for corridor changes in a couple of examples. We did one for the Orange Line and those connecting changes about this time last year. And then actually right now, we're in the process of finishing up the service equity analysis for the Metro D line, which opens in December, and associated changes with other routes that also are gonna run in that same corridor. Actually going to Transportation Committee next week with the results of that analysis. So, another example of how we've been really incorporating some of that into our work. And then also we regularly review peer systems, see what they're doing for their service analysis work, service equity analysis work, and also make updates. So one of the examples of a way that we've changed our methodology after looking around is that we increased the threshold for what we consider to be poverty level. It used to be 100% of the federal poverty guidelines, and we have now changed that to 185%. And that's using both rider as well as census data. Some of our more routine day-to-day work includes vehicle assignments. So in the first service equity evaluation, we learned that Black riders were more likely to ride on trips that were exceeding our loading standards, especially keep in mind this was during the pandemic when our loading standards were much, much lower than they were normally, because of social distancing. So we used that data when we were deciding whether to keep the larger articulated double buses on high ridership local routes, even though the load restrictions have lifted. And so that is something we're continuing to monitor and respond to as ridership continues to ramp back up. As we do some of our outreach and engagement work, we have a situation where we want to make sure what we're hearing from those that are most impacted by the changes that are being proposed. So last summer, we were gathering feedback on a proposal to relocate which streets some routes run on through downtown St. Paul, whether they're on Cedar, Minnesota, or Robert Streets. And the initial online survey that we had, we noticed that the results, the people who were responding really didn't reflect the demographics of the folks along those routes that run on those streets. And so that meant we hit the street. We out doing a lot more one-on-one engagement and really talking to those riders to make sure that we were getting a representative cross-section. Also, Metro Transit has a speed and reliability program. And when we are considering projects that will make transit faster and more reliable, we do prioritize investing in those improvements on routes that are serving a high percentage of communities of color and low-income riders, so that we're able to improve access to essential services and low-wage jobs. We've also seen the importance of aligning our level of scheduled service and operator levels. We don't like having to reduce service, but it's certainly better than telling riders, promising riders a trip will happen and then having it not show up or having us cancel at the last minute. So I'm gonna hand it back to Selena, and I think we can get into some of the discussion questions.
Thank you, Cindy and Rachel, and thank you, Chair, Co-Chair, committee members. I put there in that slide a couple of questions for discussion. I know that in the memo that I shared with you earlier in April, I included these questions. I'd love to hear also what your general thoughts are around the practice of the service equity evaluation. And, this is really the time to have a conversation. So, I don't know, Co-Chair Gonzalez or Leah, you want to moderate? You want me to ask those questions? This is just a time that we'd love to engage in that.
Well, so we have the questions posed out there, so if folks have, want to address the specific questions, or if they want to say their own, or state their own, this is the time, and I see Marianne raising her hand, so go ahead, Marianne.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Hi, my name is Marianne Padua.
Can we get the mic?
Yes,
Marianne?
sorry, I feel like I want to see.
Go ahead. We could use a song right now.
Yeah.
You sing, I'll dance.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Hi, my name is Marianne Padua. Thank you, Martina, Selena? Yes, thank you.
Marianne,
Well, my
can you
question
put the mic a
is,
little bit closer?
oh, it's not on?
No, you have to put it closer.
Just put it
Oh,
closer.
closer.
Yes, thank you, because we're recording this thing too.
All right, now it's recording, thank you. All right, well, my question is
Yep.
that in number 6, it says, the federal law requires transit agencies to show they are not discriminating when providing transit service. And I really appreciate that you're covering, those issues, and thank you so much for that. Do you think in the future, is there any way you can put in your survey or your what do you call that, in your what do you call that,
Evaluation?
in your
Evaluation.
evaluation, the analysis to cover the people with disabilities. After all, there are still deaf and blinds that rides the transit services in this area. And so I would like to actually see how many are still riding this service. And I don't know, because they still have platforms that carries them up into the things. So, and those are in different categories, where in different cities or counties, they have, I don't know how many would be the riders for those. And I think, thank you so much for taking my question, sorry.
I can take the first half of that. Thank you, that's a really great question. I wanted to just point out a little bit the difference between Title VI, which is a pretty specific federal law that is just really the start of our equity efforts at Metro Transit. It is one piece, it is certainly not all of it. So Title VI is pretty specific. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 in terms of who's protected, and so in that case it is communities of color and it is income. Persons with disabilities are not, they are protected other ways, but not part of the Title VI Act of 1964. And so that's why we have not, in terms of the official paperwork that we need to do to be in compliance with that, we stick to the letter of the law and what they say we need to do. We certainly, as we have expanded beyond that in our own work, in terms of looking at other groups going far above and beyond what Title VI requires, that's really a starting point. So, but that's why we have not included that group in there. We want to keep it clean to make sure that we're staying consistent with what the federal regulations are. And so I think that we have had, and Rachel maybe can add a little bit more to this, in terms of looking at information for how our ridership has changed during the pandemic in different groups. We did recently do the travel behavior inventory survey. Last year we did kind of a pilot where we took the 20 busiest bus routes we have, which represents more than 80% of our total ridership, and really got out and actually, it was a pretty, it wasn't a self-selected process. It was, very regimented, controlled in terms of making sure that it was, that we were getting a representative cross sampling in terms of looking at, whether it's women, it's persons with disabilities, it's seniors, it's, all sorts of groups and how they're still riding or not riding, how that's changed during the pandemic. So I'm sure we could share some of that in the future if there's interest.
May I add? Oh, can I add just? And also I want to say that our transit equity statement that I presented to you earlier this year is also informing the work of the Equity Metrics Program, which are looking at metrics and measures that we need to include in that program that go beyond Title VI or go beyond compliance. So, Rachel and I work really closely on some of the later part of the presentation you heard today from Rachel on those metrics, cut trips, frequency. All those are part of our Equity Metrics Program, but we are also looking at expanding, the demographics. We know that, we have methodology and we have a system right now to evaluate based on race, but we are looking at, what would be a reliable methodology to look into other groups, such as riders that identify having a disability, etc. So we're looking into that. So thank you, though.
I think I saw Edward and Zabat, did you want to say something as well?
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to follow up on what she was saying here about persons with disabilities and not having that information. It doesn't help us from an equity advisory group. We're looking at everybody and fair play with everybody. So these kind of presentations should include that protected group in there. And I guess the question I have is, has Title VI changed that it's now using the acronym BIPOC? So why are we using it?
Technically, Title VI still uses the phrase minority, which we have certainly recognized at the council is not a very inclusive word. And so, or a very inclusive phrase, the way, and so that's one of the, and the FTA is supposedly looking at making some updates to their Title VI regulations. This year, they actually put out kind of a call for input from all the various transit agencies around the country as to things they should be looking at, and that was one of the things that we pointed out, is that they need to kind of get with the times. And so the phrase that I was using, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and Other People of Color, of course. And that's kind of been how the council has been trying to be more inclusive in terms of how we refer to non-white, or to white, non-Hispanic, non-white.
So the
Non-Hispanic.
question was, the federal law hasn't changed so that BIPOC as an acronym
No,
is
no,
being used.
it has not.
And you've just elevated above the law in terms of how you present the information.
Yeah, we are presenting, co-chair Gonzalez, co-chair Monser,
Right.
and committee member McDonald. We are using terminology that has been used, that has been emerged practices or best practices among other transportation agencies or agencies. So using Black, Indigenous, people of color terms have been more inclusive and well adopted by other agencies as well as community members rather than minority, what the law said that in the Title VI law. So that's what we have adopted that.
Co-chair,
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought the disaggregation of the information as presented in your slides helped us a lot more because it got to look at the specific protected groups and how the service was being rendered or not rendered to those communities, which I think lends itself better to planning and to address utilization. But when you aggregate it around things like BIPOC, it doesn't give us a true picture of utilization or availability. And just as a side note, I kind of chuckle, but it's nothing to laugh about, but how many Black people lost their jobs because the bus arrived late or the service was cut?
Yeah.
So it's not something to toy with because in those communities, the reliability on that service, means people livelihoods.
Right. Yes.
So when services are cut, unbeknown to somebody who's traveling out there to get to work in a very tenuous situation, an environment where they really need to be working, having cuts in services or services be late starts to fuel stereotypes that are associated with certain communities. And no matter how much you walk in the boss's office and say, well, the bus was late,
Right.
they're not gonna believe that.
Yeah.
And I thought it's compelling. That, to me, that kind of disaggregated information really helps with the planning going forward, more so than the aggregation on the BIPOC. I think the further we stay away from terms like people of color and minorities and BIPOC, the better we get a true picture of how disparities are playing themselves out around the constructs that we all have to live under. I'm not a BIPOC.
Agreed.
I'm African American. So that does nothing for me at all when I see that aggregation there, other than to maybe help you to discern preference with one of those groups that are codified underneath there, or to hide and mask the treatment of a group that's codified under that aggregate. So it, to me, no matter what the federal law say, for us to achieve equity, we have to look at it through the constructs that we live in. Those are women, persons with disabilities, and all of the various race groups that are identified through the census identifications.
I would say agree with that 100%, and that, the part that I was talking about was more what do we have to do to make sure that we are in compliance, but we know that's not enough, which is why Rachel's part of why we did dig deeper, because 100% I agree that, just doing the minimum really isn't enough information to help us really get at the issues and where we need to be, improving our service and making changes and such. And so, I presented it because it's one of the things one of the things that we work on, but it's certainly, the work did not stop there. we agreed that that was not enough, which is why we had the whole second half.
Let me just wanna make sure that we don't lose the first question about folks with disabilities. And you mentioned that Title VI is not about disabilities, about race and other things.
Right.
I just wanna make sure that we cover whether those statistics are being gathered under other programs or parameters, like we had the disaggregated data by race, et cetera. Do we have a similar disaggregation based on hearing impaired, mobility impaired, et cetera, for our riders?
So, appreciate those questions, and we had the same kind of questions, and some of the principles we talk about is that transit is experience at stops. People wait for a bus, they see if it's on time, it's part of their fabric, of their environment. So we're often looking at our performance where it's occurring at that specific location. And that's why we used the methodology I presented today. It's always about what service and the quality of that service and the quality of those amenities are in your area where you live. Because that's where we usually start our trips or our day. And so using that information, we're looking at the American Community Survey at a block group level, which is the only level that is it's still quite large, but it's small enough that it's a reasonable kind of area for a 10-minute walk or roll around a bus stop. Now, I believe we can get disabilities information about demographics, but they're at much, much larger physical geographies. And they don't really match well to bus stops. So if you think about that space that we're looking at. So all these metrics, they're really simple bars, but they start at just that, who lives near this stop and what are the characteristics of those people that live near this stop. We unfortunately can't do that for persons with disabilities with this particular data set. Now that doesn't mean that the point isn't really well made, that we need to look at this information. We've just taken different methodologies and different approaches. So often on the persons with disabilities group, we're thinking about the experience of riding transit. Do they have that easy access on our vehicles? And so we're looking at honestly the physical infrastructure that we have often, or in this case, I'm thinking of, we do metrics to look at what is the proportion of stops that have ADA pads, or what about, you probably may have heard about IRA, which is a assistive technology that helps people with low vision to navigate the space when they get off the stop. But that's very targeted to specific people rather than neighborhoods or areas. So it's a slightly different approach based on, we also don't see patterns like we do with race, with where people live. With the persons with disabilities, there's not as clear of information. Well, we just don't even have the information, to be honest. But we don't know of those historical disinvestment that has created these specific environmental.
Sorry, I'd like
Structure.
to differ.
Okay, yeah, no, I don't know. So that's yeah.
There are also people with color too.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So I just want to expand on what Rachel said about, perhaps future metrics we can consider that may not be perhaps presented like we presented the second part of the service equity evaluation, but for example, we are still this year piloting the app IRA. And IRA, we're offering, Metro Transit is offering that for free to riders to download in their phone for those who are blind or low vision. And we can get data from that, usage. We can get data perhaps from passes. So, but I guess what we wanna perhaps set the expectations is we may not be able to give such a clean presentation in a short time because of that accessibility to reliable data and methodology. But we're committed to look into what are the metrics we need to, or measures we need to identify to continue to report how we're doing, and and not only with people of color or those groups that we presented, but also seniors, youth. We have youth, that ride our buses. So what is their experience? And we know that we need to do better in terms of understanding their experiences riding the bus. So I really hope that this service equity evaluation serves as a platform to develop an equity metrics program where we can identify metrics of many metrics, service metrics, workforce metrics that really can give us more data and be more accountable to the work we do. And when we say we're doing equity work, we do equity work because we're also evaluating that impact. So we don't do it, just we evaluate it. Yes.
Let me just make one last comment because
Yeah.
I asked the question. So just for future reference, we had complaints directly to me of folks that have disabilities and they're not served by either Metro Mobility or bus routes. I think that has to be also a metric that is captured somehow, in addition to the ones about, how's the service, is it on time, etc. Also the unmet needs should also be taken into account. So that was my last comment. And Vanessa had a question. Who had a question? Okay, there's Vanessa and then Anita.
And then I think we will have to cut it off, but let's figure out a way to get additional comments.
I want to say just one.
Okay,
Thank you.
Vanessa. So quick question, so does any of this data or matrix evaluation take into consideration safety? Because I'm a person that likes to take the bus. I like the buses right by my house. It drops me off at the front door at my job here in Minnesota. It's inexpensive. I work for the federal government and they want us to use public transportation, so they give us a Metro Transit card every month. So it's free and I like it. However, there's always drama on the bus. There's always an argument, a fight. The train is a whole nother beast, So does anybody look at that in terms of ridership? Like, there's a lot of people like me that want to take the bus or the train, but they just don't want to get caught up in a lot of other stuff. So that's my question.
It's a great question. I can start and then maybe Rachel can help me with some safety data and the Metro Transit earlier this year adopted a safety and security action plan that was presented to the Met Council. So the safety and security action plan includes different strategies to address safety in our system. And not only, there are strategies such as the pilot program that is currently, I think it's about to close, where we pilot a 2-card light rail, where, our police and CSOs, officers have easier access if they need to come to the light rail. So there are many, many actions within that plan that we are going to either continue to do or start doing to address safety and security. But in addition to actions that were presented to the council, we have committed to look into data and looking into how those actions are actually yielding the results of creating safer environments or a safer experience for our riders. So yes, we are looking into those metrics, and again, it's a lot of looking into what data we have available, how we are working with our, Metro Transit Police Department in terms of what they're tracking, data they are tracking, data that we track on the operations side. So there will be a full report back to the council sometime soon, I don't want to say
September.
September, thank you, September, that will include an update on those measures that we have taken in terms of, safety and security measures, but also what data can we report that we are monitoring around safety. So, I don't know, Rachel.
I'll just, okay.
Two comments. One, those two approaches. One, we're asking our we're starting a practice of asking about safety and security perceptions at every opportunity that we connect with customers about surveys. So we're adding standard questions. So regardless of the main purpose of the survey, we're starting to monitor that over time, and we'll be able to track that consistently. And then we also are looking at, and we will be publishing quarterly reports that have actual crime. And you'll see those trends and changes.
Thank you.
For times considerations, Anita had a question, and then I think if you had other comments, if you can just email those to us or to Selena, and then we'll make sure that your comments or questions get sent to the Metro Transit folks for their response, so we can then move on.
Okay. I see the mic in front of me and I sometimes freeze. I've got a big mouth, so I don't usually use one. My comment or question is adding to Mr. McDonald's comment about access to on-time services. I'm sure that you've taken into consideration that the majority of those services are coming through Minneapolis, north and south, east and west, but specifically north and south, where high traffic volume is during those peak rush hours to and from downtown, those veins. So are you considering adding extra lines to that? Because my recollection is the rides or the buses come 30 minutes apart. And if that that first bus, and sometimes when I'm going, they're back to back because of the on-time service problems, the issues of the backed up traffic on the main corridors through North and South Minneapolis. And so is there any consideration of adding bus lines to that? Because I used to be one of those that was always late to work. And, and I'm starting 45 minutes early to an 8-hour or an 8-minute drive door to door downtown. And it would take me 45 minutes because I'm traveling along those main corridors. So my question is, to get to work and to school on time, are there considerations to adding more services so that people can get to work back and forth, get home on time, get to work, and if they miss a bus, they have to call home, call their daycare or whatever to say, I'm gonna be 30 minutes late because that bus didn't come on time, or I missed it because it was early.
I can take that. You wanna please hand the microphone? Thank you. So I think a couple of thoughts there, and that really gets at how we do some of our service planning and how we have set up our transit network and how you design your routes. First of all, the idea of adding additional service is something that we are very interested in, and that comes back to the operator shortage issue. Right now, we don't have the capacity to do that, but we are very interested in doing so. It's one of the few times I've been with Metro Transit for over 20 years, and this is one of the few times in my career that with federal COVID aid and such, that we actually have money for a change and don't have operators. So that's our challenge at the moment, is really not that won't be a challenge in the future again, because it will, but, and so, we're really pretty limited in terms of what we can do to add services anywhere right now, because we just don't have the people to be able to drive the vehicles and the buses and the trains. In terms of what you were talking about when you see more than one bus kind of going back to back, we call that bus bunching. And that is definitely an issue that actually tends to happen on on routes that run the most often, because they're so close to each other to begin with. But that is certainly something we're trying to do a better job of, more active in real time responding to if one bus. What happens is that those buses are scheduled close enough together that if something happens on one, that kind of a domino effect that starts to come down the line. And so we are doing a lot more. Our street operations staff and our transit control center staff is starting to get into what's called active route management, where instead of just making, where they actually are looking at being able to respond more quickly to take care of the immediate problem so that it doesn't then ricochet down the line to some of the other buses that are maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes down the corridor, so that they don't all catch up to each other. By the time they've caught up to each other, that means we've missed our opportunity, we're too late. We need to be more active in managing it, so we don't even get to that point. We're working on that.
Okay, because that's happening now,
I
so.
know, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much and for your presentation. Again, any other questions, just for time's sake, please email those, and then we'll send those to Selena, and then if you can distribute those to your staff for an answer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Just going back on the agenda, since we had a quorum, since we started the meeting, we need to take care of a couple of business, or I guess one business item, and then we can go to the next item of the agenda, which is the culture update. But at this point, the next order of business is going back to the approval of the minutes. And I'm gonna ask if, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the June 21, 2022 meeting and the July 19, 2022 meeting? Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, good. So, the legal aspects are covered now, so I'm happy.
All right, so our next two agenda items are both for our internal discussion and vote. I'm gonna start with the co-chair update and start us off with just a little bit of context. Our bylaws state that there will be two co-chairs for the EAC. One is a council member and selected by the Met Council chair and appointed to be our co-chair, and that is the role that Francisco has played for us so well in the last couple of years. And the other is selected from our membership, and our bylaws are silent on how that selection process happens. It's up to us to decide. It does say that the term of the co-chair is for 1 year. That we have a 1-year term for our co-chair. And so my term started in April of 2021, so would have ended in March of 2022. And we're in the process of selecting a new co-chair. I did let the body know that that position was open, to reach out with questions or interest, and we're very lucky that we have 2 people here today who have expressed interest in being the co-chair. I want to take a couple minutes I didn't warn them, so I apologize, but just for those 2, because we also haven't been together as a body very long, to introduce themselves, say a few words, and then upon recommendation of the staff, we're gonna do a vote for the next co-chair. And then what our process will be is, our vote will go to the Met Council body as a recommendation, and then the Met Council will adopt our recommendation as the next co-chair. They might not get to that order of business before our next EAC meeting, so I'll remain in the seat until the Met Council has approved our recommendation. It may be before the next meeting, or it might be the meeting after that. Anything else you'd like to add as context, Francisco?
Just to make sure that folks realize that because we don't have a specific process, we've been struggling as to how to do this. I personally wanted to do a more expedited process, but Cynthia did accurately and fairly indicated that we needed a process that has provided the opportunity to folks to be heard and be more equitable. So thank you for, reminding me that we need to have equity in our processes. And even if it's not the most expeditious way of doing it, it's the fair way of doing things, so. For future discussions or for future processes, we hopefully can have a more defined process that everybody can know way beforehand what the process is. But at this point, we're just gonna have that, the folks that submitted their interest, we're just gonna ask you to just share a little bit about why you are interested in the position of co-chair. And then the membership is gonna do a vote, and then that recommendation is gonna go to the council.
All right, do either of our interested parties want to go first?
Chair and co-chair, I'd like to just point out that there is a third person who submitted their desire to be co-chair through email, and we can read that off for that person, yes.
Okay, do you mind doing that?
Sure, yeah,
We
absolutely.
could even start there, if you're
Okay.
ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
Voting for
Is that June?
a replacement for
For you.
Aaliyah. Yeah.
No, we all vote.
Yeah.
Everybody votes.
Do you remember?
Lila, you want the mic?
Sure.
Can I have a point of order? So is there a nomination and a second, like a motion and a second, and then we vote? Or are we like tallying up?
We're gonna do a roll call vote.
Okay,
We don't have a process, so
Uh-huh.
we're just gonna do a roll call vote.
okay. But you can only do a roll call if you have a motion and a second. Are you talking about just a tally, like
A
straw poll? We're doing a straw poll?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I
gotcha.
should make a motion.
Yeah, it's
Don't we need to
pretty
make a motion
informal.
first?
Yeah,
Sure.
Somebody just expresses their desire to be in that position and states why, and then it's a consensus.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
totalitarianism is kind of in the atmosphere. So we don't blame you for wanting to be an authoritarian. It's just floating around here everywhere these days.
Well, my mother
It's
grew
the
up
building.
in Spain under Franco, so that's my king, so.
That's the reason.
Yes.
We are ready.
all right, go ahead.
This is from Jen
Owen. Hi EAC members, I'm applying to be EAC co-chair. There's a lot happening, I feel we need all of Minnesota society to work for the people. That's why I'm applying for co-chair. What interests me about the co-chair role is my need to see more diverse leadership. I notice we tend to conduct ourselves and govern differently. I also want to be a part of how Minnesotan society is responding to COVID-19 pandemic, civil unrest, harassment, and unjust hate crimes. My intentions for EAC co-chair is to give a voice to the committee members, continue appropriate and clear participation, get clear on how the committee functions in relation to Metro Council, also how the Metro Council and EAC affect Minnesotan society at large with the work the Metro Council does, meet new professionals, network in Minnesota's, and value everyone's time. My experience includes running as independent for mayor of Maplewood, executive director of nonprofit organization, leadership and management analysis on local, state, federal levels, and private and public sectors. And that was it.
No, I read that, but I do have a question. Is the person currently running for mayor of Maplewood? I did read the background. I did see a website that was promoting her candidacy for mayor.
When I spoke with her about her interest, she said she was currently running. I don't know what happened in the primary, so I'm sorry that I don't know what happened since the primary happened.
I think our bylaws say that if you are an elected official, you cannot be a member, if I'm correct, of the EAC.
Yes.
So, but if you're just running and you're not yet, I think that's not a problem.
So if she got elected, both here and there, she would have to relinquish that vote.
Correct, that's my understanding. All right, so that was Jen Owen, and we have two other candidates. I mean, if you wanna self-identify and okay, Vanessa.
All right.
Hey,
Go Vanessa.
No pressure here, right?
No.
So I'm Vanessa, and, So just a little bit about me, I think of District 6. District 6. Okay, and I work across the street at the Social Security Administration. I've been with Social Security for about 15 years. I'm originally from Chicago. I've been here 6 years. And I got a promotion. I put in, because I was tired of snow and ice and cold weather, so I put in for Texas and I got Minnesota. Make plans and God laughs, so here I am. I am also founder and executive director of the HOPE Project, which is a nonprofit organization. And HOPE is an acronym for helping overcome poverty through empowerment. And we work with individuals and families who experiencing being unhoused. We also work with victims of intimate partner abuse. And we have a grant from Hennepin County for $5,000. So it's not a lot of money, but it's great because we're gonna do a mental health day on August 27th, which is a Saturday. And it's to provide mental health services for BIPOC males ages 13 and up. Because I think, you know, when I wrote the grant, I said, they asked me what would I do with the money, and I said, you know, we have soldiers and people that serve in the military who see all sorts of trauma, and when they come back, they have PTSD and anxiety and so much unhealed trauma. And yet we have people in our community that witness crimes and you know, gunshots and so forth, and nobody ever speaks to them about how to grieve and how to be vulnerable, and it's okay to cry and it's okay to take that mask off. And so we're having a day where we have licensed therapists that are gonna come out, and they're also BIPOC. And they're gonna, you know, they're gonna see the therapists, and then we have certified yoga instructor that's gonna teach them about breathing and relaxation techniques, so they don't, you know, they're not constantly on edge. And we also have a certified circle keeper that's gonna teach them, you know, some breathing techniques and so forth. So we're really excited about that. But the reason that I submitted the email to be co-chair is because I just love coming here. I love learning. Just so exciting, you know, all the committees, the people that come and tell us about what they're doing. And then you guys are all so smart, and I go, oh my God, man, these people are smart and they're doing this and that and so forth. And so I just wanna continue to learn as much as I can, and just if I can be in that role of co-chair, you know, I think it'll help me learn even more. And so that's why I submitted my name in the hat, so. Shameless plug.
For the vote.
Oh, I think we're gonna do a roll call.
Oh, you just gonna do a roll call vote?
Go ahead. Okay, is this on? Yeah.
Is this on?
I'm Anita Ravina Davis. I've been a member of the EAC for a few years. And initially I had thought to run as co-chair for this group because of my past experience with the organization and the people and my experience with communities. I am formerly the chair of the Minneapolis Commission on Civil Rights. And so when she talks about the language, I'm going to tell you right here and now, the easiest way is to say everybody has the right to equal access and the right to know.
Yep.
That's the easiest definition that helps people understand the language, because otherwise it's just old words that we need to move forward. I had initially, as I said, thought to run as co-chair, but I've been a member of a group of community members in Minneapolis for 20 years. And the last 2 years we've been meeting since the death of George Floyd. And we have a language, a memorandum of understanding with the Minneapolis Police Department on training, use of force, recruitment, out-of-home placement of children. And we just had it signed Monday. So we're celebrating that, but that also means for my commitment, more hours. So I had a meeting this morning, and I'll have a meeting tomorrow with the police on recruitment. And so I'm rescinding my interest in running as co-chair for this committee because, because to me, after working 20 years to get this language and the police to agree to it,
That's amazing.
we want to make sure that they stay on that.
All right, so one other piece of context is the appointment is for 1 year. It can be renewed, but if one of you is like really excited about this for the future, there will be an opportunity in the future. So can I get staff assistance in doing a roll call so we can do our vote? And so now we're voting between two candidates, Jen
I
Owens
have not
or
seen
Vanessa
her here
Jenkins.
at all.
And as your name is called, just state who you are giving your vote.
She's not coming, so I don't. To me, that would make it hard for me to vote for somebody if I've never seen them here.
Francisco Gonzalez,
Vanessa?
John Pacheco,
Abstain.
Philip Sterner,
Vanessa.
Shiley,
Vanessa.
Michael Lucini, T. Way, Nicholas Jenkins, Anita Irvina Davis,
Vanessa?
Patrick Tashida, Edward McDonald,
Vanessa by Pop?
Vanessa Jenkins, Leah Goldstein Moses,
Vanessa?
Zabet Awad,
Vanessa.
Melinda Lee, Jen Owens, Mary Ann Padua, Brianne Rothstein, Stephanie Scheider, Betsy Sikoff, Kristen Stacy.
Vanessa.
All right, so our, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I wanted to.
Oh, okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
All right, well, congrats, Vanessa.
We have heard that people have ascended from the seat to the governor's chair, so.
All right,
Vanessa, Mother's Love in Minneapolis works with
we have to send it to the next
Lisa
one.
Farr.
Lisa Clemens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Alpha.
Yeah, I work with Alan.
Yeah.
Vanessa, I was just speaking with Leah about how to ease you all into the position. So we're gonna discuss how like it can be upfront and in some future meetings up until you're officially appointed by the chair of the Met Council. Maybe you can just participate informally, so you can get some experience.
Okay. Yeah.
So we'll be in touch.
Okay, we do have one additional order of official business on our agenda, which is around the equity policy feedback and anti-racism definition. I'll again give just a little bit of context, which is in, I believe it was June. Staff presented a draft equity policy and an anti-racism definition that comes from AREJ, what does it stand for?
Anti-Racism and Economic Justice Trust.
Anti-Racism and Economic Justice Trust initiative that the council was going for. We gathered some feedback in that meeting, and then I worked to summarize it and send it out by email to all committee members and gathered some additional feedback. What I'd like to take some time to do today, the feedback is, it looks like this. It is a little lengthy, so if you haven't seen it before, you might want to take a few minutes. But just take some time to see if there's anything else you'd like to offer, any amendments you'd like to offer. And then I'd like to adopt this into our official record if we get consent from the group. Because as one of our members pointed out, there's a lot of power in our numbers. And so having the feedback adopted formally will add a little bit of power behind it. So I'll give you a moment to read, add any amendments or ask any questions, and then we'll have discussion and move forward.
Madam Co-Chair, I just want to point out, I've read this, several times, leading up to this meeting, and, I just wanted to point out that you did an excellent job of capturing our discussion. And, quite frankly, as I went back through my notes, it was very, very succinct and, captured, I think, everything that was discussed in that meeting. And these recommendations are really solid. I'd like to move motion to approve, and I know we can get a second and then discussion.
Second.
Can you give us time to read it?
Okay, we have a motion to approve the recommendations, and then we have a second. But we still have time for folks to consider, ponder, criticize, add, subtract, provide any feedback, and then we'll do the vote. So let's just wait a few more minutes and then see if folks want to add anything.
First time to see this.
Phil?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Okay, so just looking at the,
Question?
just comments on the reports. On the second page, it just, we talk about a black, what did this see about the bank? But it just doesn't seem like it's right grammar, and I think we could, just call it like a black-owned bank and actually name the bank. It's in St. Paul. It just moved in, but it just seemed like we could do better with the wording. That says, second dot on the bottom says, work with black bank, divest from banks that have shown to harm black and just low income. So I just think work with a black-owned bank, and I guess we probably can't say the name, especially maybe sometimes there's conflict of interest, but just say, work with black or indigenous-owned banks and divest from other banks. And I've been working with that on the audit, from our investment review committee, so thank you.
Thank you.
Well, actually, there is a motion on the floor, so you can't really.
I'm willing to accept that as a friendly amendment to my motion.
There was no second, so you can't.
Okay, so you rescind your motion?
I'm accepting it as a friendly amendment to my motion.
Okay.
You have any feedback or comments?
Well, I haven't had time to really read it,
Oh,
so that's why. Thank you so much.
Do we name a specific bank?
We could say Black Red and Owned Bank. Yeah, as our amendment.
While people are waiting, I just maybe wanted to say that I'm grateful for this document, and to iterate that just collecting individual comments isn't as powerful as like the whole. And so I appreciate all that extra work that was done to do that, because it's a lot more work. And then one thing, while you had asked for best practices, and I just ran across the Richfield Public Schools. Holy Hannah, they're wonderful. All in their statements and the language that they put out in their emails. So I think that would be a really good one to look at in terms of how they do racial equity in general.
Awesome, thank you. And then we'll go to Anita after that.
Just a quick comment, amendment to my amendment to the one here, but on the last paragraph, we talk about do not use the term black, indigenous, or people of color. So probably with a bank, it shouldn't say saying black-owned bank, it should be African-American-owned bank or banks for indigenous. So use the right proper terminology there. So, all right, thank you.
And then do you want to pass it to Anita? She had a.
I don't need it. On the second page, the input on the draft definition of anti-racism, and it starts out Metropolitan Council. Is there a possibility we can expand on that wording so that it's pretty clear and in future, because something like the work of the Metropolitan Council, the employees of the Metropolitan Council, the staff, or something that makes it more implicit on what the goals are? Because I can potentially see staff at Metropolitan Council say, it says Metropolitan Council and I just work here, as a way of getting past that. Because there are people like that.
Yep.
And so I want to be more implicit on who at the Metropolitan Council. Is it the whole? Is it management? Is it the board? Who is it? So I would like to see an expansion of the word Metropolitan Council.
How about the Metropolitan Council, its staff and
In its entirety?
its entirety?
Council members too, because we're not staff officially, but, can add council members and staff. Volunteers, anybody associated with, I think we can add those terms to
Yeah.
make it more comprehensive.
Thank you.
We need a few more minutes for feedback.
Thanks for adding that, just do it.
Heard that. You're just doing it with Minneapolis
Just
Police
do it,
Department, it
yeah.
sounds like.
We're fine, yeah. Yourself, a couple minutes. Okay. Can you have help doing a roll call vote?
Can you specify, chair and co-chair, the vote is for the whole document or for AREJ?
The whole document.
The whole document.
Yep, and we have 2 amendments to the
There are
document.
2 friendly amendments that have been accepted in the motion. The motion is to approve the whole document with the friendly amendments. And it was second.
So can I do a roll call? Is that okay?
Yes.
All right, I think we'll move on to the roll call vote.
You ready?
Yep.
Francisco Gonzalez,
Aye.
John Pacheco,
Aye.
Philip Sterner,
Aye.
Chai Lee,
Aye.
Michael Lucini, T. Way, Nicholas Jenkins, Anita Urbina Davis,
Aye.
Patrick Tashida, Edward McDonald,
Aye.
Vanessa Jenkins,
Aye.
Leah Goldstein Moses,
Aye.
Zabet Awad,
Aye.
Melinda Lee, Jen Owens, Mary Ann Padua, Brianne Rothstein,
Aye.
Stephanie Scheider, Betsy Sitkoff, Kristen Stacy.
All right, motion carries, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll change the text to make the additions, and then we'll be submitting this to, who will it go?
I think to the staff
To
here,
staff,
yeah,
and then it will be directed to Powers that be.
great. One other quick announcement from my part, then we're gonna ask our council members to share a little bit about what's going on their committees. And then we'll open it up for announcements, from our committee members. So, Francisco and I received an email from Betsy Sitkoff yesterday that she will be resigning the committee, and she asked us to share that on her behalf. All right, so council members, do you have any updates from the other committees that you serve on that would be useful for the EAC to be aware of?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, I'm on community development and management, and I think the more recent stuff is from management. In last month, 2 weeks in a row, we had wonderful updates from staff about the equity grants, and so we last year appropriated $3.9 million for a bunch of really innovative equity projects ranging from maintenance tech, kind of training programs to financial incentives for more income vendors and contracting, to light rail vehicle tech pathways programs, and improving council contracts to make them more diverse, and also improving our outreach to multicultural media, and also looking at how we do equity across the institution, the whole enterprise. And I think if you're interested in that, go back to the last 2 agendas and meeting minutes of the management committee. And right now, from the CDC, we're also still currently taking, through the end of the month, public comments on our public housing plans. The current plan year has no real dramatic administrative changes. But that's all I got. I guess the only other thing I would plug in is that based on the staff presentation earlier, we have about 200 jobs open across the enterprise at Met Council. So some of the jarring statistics about bus operators, across the board to IT jobs, for example, there's a lot of jobs opening. So I think it's incumbent on all of us here at this table to tell our friends and networks that there's a lot of wonderful jobs opening at the Met Council. We have close to 200 jobs open here, so please tell folks.
Well-paid jobs.
Yes. John?
Well, being a new kid on the block, I'm spending almost all my time in transit these days. So within the District 6 is the extension of the Green Line from downtown to Eden Prairie. And everything in between there, with meeting with Hopkins and Golden Valley and all of those folks, and everyone's very interested and excited about it. We are behind in regards to time frame and money, but it is moving forward, and so that was just 2 days ago. Yesterday morning, it might have been this morning, I was going through the Blue Line extension, or no, the Green Line extension. That was in the Blue Line now was up north. Anyway, so back to the Blue Line, and there's that one's it runs through North Minneapolis, down West Broadway. It's gonna impact a number of the folks in the communities, so we'll be having a lot more outreach around what's planned so far today, and there's a lot of interest in that one. And then the E line is the rapid transit bus system, number 6, which is what I come to work and everything on. And the question there is, where do we have the stations? There's a challenge to one on 50th in France, and one by my house on 43rd in Upton. And so I was on there the other morning, just sitting out talking to the neighbors there. We will be offering some rides, as a matter of fact, for bike rides coming through down, because the biggest issue for us on the south side is the trails are closed, around where the route is going to be. And so we're bringing some people on the buses, on the rail, on the train, or on the bikes, if you will, just to ride and get a sense of really what's going on there. So that's the bulk of what I'm working on. I also sit on the management committee, and we've covered that a little bit, and then this committee. So I'm really pleased to be here. I was on this committee again years ago, 32 or 31 years ago. I was Met Council member, and I was on the diversity committee at that point. So it's been a long time in between, but I think the people, both staff and people in the advisory committees that I've met over the years, have been very passionate and great skills brought forward in the Met area. in regards to name now, I said, then maybe, Anita remembers now, see, I started out with Mexican, the Mexican American, then, that would have been in the 50s and 60s. And then it was, in the 70s, I was Chicano, and then the 80s, I was Hispanic, and then I was Latino, and now
We're
I'm
evolving.
Latinx.
Always
So
revolving.
now I think Latinx is the last one, so every time I turn around, I got a new acronym
You're
for it.
BIPOC now.
Yeah, I know that. I'll remember that.
Thank you. And not to repeat the transportation with council members Lee and Pacheco said, but regarding the environment committee, which I also serve on, they're really looking for people that want to do the mission, be water protectors and really want to make the water clean and preserve water and that. So we're looking for people, and diversity is a great team-focused group. So as Councilmember Lee said, it's over 200 openings. A lot of those are the environment committee as well looking, and I think it's very rewarding work and very collaborative and very growth oriented for people's personal growth. So I encourage pass on your networks. We're looking for people in the environment area of our Met Council.
I did some environmental justice work when you were doing the new scrubbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but there's a lot of environmental justice community groups now that are forming that would probably be interested in working, especially with the water plant down there, east side.
I just went on a water walk to the Coldwater Springs on Sunday there.
Yeah.
Good group there, so yes. All right, thank you so much, Anita.
Thank you. And
I
then
can send you some group names.
to wrap this up, I think we'll see if there's announcements from committee members. I see both Edward and Mary Ann have their hands up, so I'll bring this over. There you go.
Thank you, thank you. I just have a question about housing, since we've done some housing here, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to attend my housing committee, and where I've actually been a victim of my own housing at this recent licensing. So what I need to find out for the other housing vouchers, where they have a new system being added to the housing for disability, and I think they needed to train the housing directors, or the housing directors, and also they should have provided a better plan for this new equipment that they were offering for this computer thing that they call, what was that, Mark? This computer thing in the housing.
I forget what it's called, but.
Oh, you're old.
Yeah.
Mary, I'm sorry, what city do you live in? Because depending on
Washington County.
depending on the city you live in, you might be working directly with your city HRA and not the Met Council.
Yeah, Cottage Grove. But I think it is utilized for each county now, as far as I know, because you have to be you have to connect with the computer first, okay? And then now they do viewing through
Virtual.
Huh?
Virtual.
Virtual, okay?
Oh.
But first, you have to apply through electronically online, okay? And so, you have to do A first, and then B comes along, okay? And you can't miss going online. If you miss that, of course, B won't come along. And then there's C, where, of course, then now they have to come online visually. then you go around your house. So then, none of those processes will go unless you do A first. Well, then I was accused that I didn't do any of that stuff. I said, well, how can that be when I went online, when I went on, they went and visit my house through my phone. So of course I went on A. So you see, the people who are addressing these things, they can just lie through their teeth saying Mary Ann was negligent. And you know, it is not fair to a person with disability when somebody can say she did not apply online. And I didn't have any receipt that I'm holding on that I applied online. But what process came on is that, well, somebody came to visit my house through Zoom.
Marianne, I'll make a commitment to connect with you directly offline with the Washington County CDC to try to figure this out for you.
Oh, I filed a complaint.
Yeah, it sounds like this is not a Metro HRA issue, so, but we'll confer offline about this particular issue with you.
Well, this is happening, and then the housing, and then they don't, the manager, okay? Then the manager, on top of that, you have to go on the Rent Cafe, and the Rent Cafe did not work. The Washington County did not work. It doesn't connect. And then they blame it on me.
So that it align with our committee, it might be good to kind of take a look at a broader swath of this new system of registering online and then having virtual tours for inspection, and see if there's some disproportionality in terms of people being punished in some kind of way because of it. I mean, I think what she's suggesting, as I hear her, is that she may not be the only victim in it. And it may be okay, and we should look into her situation to make sure. But if we got this new system in place, we should take a look at it in a longitudinal kind of way and say, are there flaws in it, or are we seeing a disproportionate number of people with disabilities, African American, low income, or whatever it is, being
Non-English speakers.
Exactly.
non-English speaking that are being affected by this new system. And that would be nice to get some kind of report broader than just, well, we need to help Mary with her situation, but on a broader sense to see if there is something else happening there.
Exactly, because you know what? I can advocate for myself, okay? What I'm talking about are the people that are being kicked off the system and becoming homeless again. I mean, it takes 10 years to get a voucher.
And I'm hearing that, you know, we went through this whole eviction thing. We went through people not having income to pay their fair share of those subsidized rents. And there are a lot of issues. I know there's a group called Defend in Minneapolis right now with the public housing, Defend Glendale or something like that. And I get a lot of their correspondence. There are some folks from first ring, second ring suburban communities. In my involvement with MICA, we're getting a lot of chatter back about folks who lived, had Section 8 vouchers or lived in public housing that are being kicked out of their housing because of not being able to weather the storm through the pandemic.
Exactly, and
So-
that is why, and yes.
So we should probably see if we can
We
get
can
some
add
kind
that
of
to our
report.
housing task force.
Yes.
And that is
Okay.
exactly why I'm sharing my story, and this was the reason why I was not able to come to the meetings, because I was dealing with this thing for 2.5 months. I was suffering my mental illness because of this?
You know,
Whether you're gonna have housing or not.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, you know, just kind of building off what Chai was reporting to us on the fabulous thing done around the equity grants, those are excellent things to report. And we keep raising the question about, one thing we've been sort of fixated on planning equity. But, and that's important and we should do that and we should submit our opinions about equity definitions and strategies and all that. But there's a requirement right now that the Met Council be equitable in everything that it does. And they're doing it. Billions of dollars are being spent on transportation. Transportation services are in place. Housing is being administered and utilized and developed, but we're not getting any reports on the results of that. You know, at the beginning of this year, there was some specific outcomes that were established in terms of employees hired, the diversification of that employees, the use of the billions of dollars coming in for transportation purposes, housing units being produced. We talked about the new affordable home ownership program, but we're not monitoring the results. And what happens is at the end of the year, 6 months from now, 4 or 5 months from now, they'll come in and say, well, we didn't make the mark. We underutilized people. We just didn't hire as many as we should. But I think as a part of our group, helping them to fashion the equity strategy is important, but we should also be monitoring what's going on right now. And so once again, I would love for us on our next agenda to have an agenda item that would have someone from staff come and report on the major areas of equity implementation as it exists today. How many contracts are being issued to diverse communities? What's the ridership issues along diverse communities? How many affordable housing units are being built? Who's getting the Section 8 certificates? All of those things that the Met Council does. What is the diversification of people involved in planning? People that are advising on water quality? All of those kind of things. If we can get a report on that, I think it would help us out because there was a plan established at the beginning of this year to achieve some of those things. If we can have that, that would be great for us.
We saw the dashboard early on, the beta dashboard, so just having a, monthly report on that dashboard, I think that's the tool, right?
Yeah.
One of the things, one of the things that I was going to ask about is how can, for example, myself and maybe Ms. Vanessa be involved with the Blue Line? Because I know there are some issues in North Minneapolis in our district that are affecting communities and people. And there's stations, there's where it's running, and there's access, it's running through homes and sound and, noise issues and barriers that are being discussed amongst community. But it's helpful that maybe in some way we could talk about it here, or bring it here and talk about, how can we help you with some of those issues? Not just as community members, but also as equity advisors. And so I think for myself, I'd like to have, I agree with you, more reports and more information and maybe access or maybe an invitation to sit in on some of those meetings so that we can get that firsthand. Because it's beneficial on both sides. It's beneficial to our communities, but it's beneficial to Metropolitan Council too. I mean, isn't that why we're here?
Just briefly, I think those are great points. We've seen some of those reports in some of our other committees. So I know that the information is out there, but I don't think it's being presented here.
Yeah.
So having that as a standard or how do you call it, a standing agenda item, I think it'll be easy to do because the data is out there.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is a lot of it goes online. But I'll be honest with you, unless I have a specific interest to look at the Metropolitan Council's website, I'm not gonna know. It's not on my calendar to do that every day. What's going on?
Yeah.
What's up, what's up with the county, what's up with St. Paul, what's up with the city? I mean, that's the thing, and I know that a lot of times this information is on the websites. But in reality, not everybody makes a point to go to the websites and look for that information, and look for that news. Unless they're really interested and actively involved.
And there are
Mr. Chairman.
opportunities, because I know we've taken at least 2 or 3 tours that I've been on, and just went the route and listened to some of the communities. We had a presentation on West Broadway, some of the businesses on how they see it impacting them. We have the homeowners on Lyndhurst there, or on Lyndale and Plymouth, and say, well, we don't want it there, we want it across. We want it not to come through here, but to go over on the other side of 94, down Washington.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the neighbors sitting there, we've approved a route, but those two, that one section is the bulk of the questions.
It's very vocal.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we've agreed to study it further, and that's kind of where we're at with that. But all these things are moving forward, but my point is that there are opportunities to go on some of these tours. And so maybe we just look at how we can invite members of the advisory to some of these, and you can choose, which one you're very interested in. Maybe buy your house, or somebody, because these things are very fluid, and they're doing what they call these garage meetings for a while, because they couldn't get into houses or in schools. They're meeting literally on the street, or in the alley, or the garage there. But there are some opportunities there. From the Met Council's point right now, the best we can, and the most transparent we can be, the better. So otherwise it's all innuendo. When they're going here, they're gonna take your house. They're gonna move away from your yard. And so I think, like I said, even this morning, when I've taken the bus, or taken the bikes trail, I learned something every day.
Yeah, see, and that's the thing, that's with community, as community members, we know, we meet people and we get to know them. And I haven't worked at Hennepin myself for 6 years, but I still get calls from community members about information at the county. If you know somebody, people are gonna call because they feel comfortable and they've met that individual. And so, that's the thing. Talking to people, or meeting people, or knowing people.
So I wanna say, I can stay, but I recognize that people have commitments in their lives and might need to step out at this time, and our meeting is past time. So if you do need to step away, that's fine. I'll stick around for the conversation to continue. And thank you all for being here. It was great to see your faces and connect with me.
Thank you.
Mary would like me to read this. I'm not sure how appropriate it is. It's a letter from DHS, and it's related to this. I'm not unsure if we should or shouldn't.
I just want to share it because it's very important.
Maybe it might be better if you pass it around versus me reading it out loud, so that people can read it.
Yeah, no, it's very important because this is one of the issues. I filed a complaint, and this is a direct result of a person filing a complaint about what they did to me.
The letter does say where you can go get help. I just don't think our committee is one that's gonna help you resolve that.
No, I don't need that committee to resolve it.
You just wanna
Yeah.
to see what
That
people are getting.
when a person is trying to file a complaint.
For privacy.
Yeah, I'd rather not have something as personal as that
No,
being
it's not-
public.
to me.
I know you're saying it's okay, but I just.
I think just for your privacy,
Yeah.
just want not to.
Because this is recorded and goes online too, so I think it's better.
Yeah, we're being live streamed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we may wanna.
To me, it's harassment, and it's also retaliation from the DHS, housing DHS. And it's not fair because just because I wrote them a letter to tell them that the person who tried to take away my voucher, through that process, even though it wasn't right, I did everything that they said I'm supposed. I mean, after all, I've had my voucher since 2012. Come on. The process is the same.
Let me just,
And yet, here they are, gonna
Let
try
me,
and take
just
away
one
my.
second.
I'm sorry.
Let me just adjourn officially the meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Because this discussion is not, should not be part of the minutes. So let's officially adjourn the meeting.
Okay.
And you can continue the discussion, but we're adjourning the meeting. So thank you very much for your participation. And we'll see you next one. Thank you.
Thank you.